I didn't see boxing the way I did before. That's exactly what happened. I saw, for the first time in my life, I saw the violence. I saw the violence in the sport, and I couldn't separate the two anymore. The sport is the sport, but the sport is violent. I thought to myself, why am I training so hard to try and hurt someone else? Well, why am I putting all this effort in weeks and weeks just to try and hurt someone else? And I couldn't justify the whole means of I'm doing this for my family. I'm doing this to basically give my kids another life. There are plenty of jobs out there. There's other ways to make money. For me, hurting someone else isn't a good reason to make money, and so I've really disconnected with that. I struggled to come to terms with it because it's the only thing I know. I've been doing boxing my whole life. I finally just made things easier on myself and just accepted it and chose to walk away.
There you have it. Junior Fa, the New Zealand heavyweight boxer who's been the number 2 heavyweight from New Zealand in recent years, has walked away from boxing. And you heard his reasons, couldn't sort of stand the violence anymore. And the story here that you can see on screen, and I thought the headline was a little bit on the nose because it talks about goes vegan, like that's got anything to do with it. Top boxer quits, goes vegan, I couldn't hurt people anymore. So I will leave a link in the description if you want to read that the story in its entirety, but it does traverse that Junior Fa has effectively for the past year or more been grappling with a crisis of identity. He'd left his church, and there's been a lot going on internally, and he's been ruminating on that in the past year. So he had actually been due to face Arslanbek Makhmudov in May. But clearly that is not happening now. So we'll just go through a couple of things here from the story, and then a few thoughts, because I think Junior Fa has been a good servant to New Zealand boxing. He was a good amateur, actually had a win over Makhmudov in the amateurs, a medalist at the Commonwealth Games. Junior Fa has been a good servant of the sport. So, I think ultimately one of the things you have to consider with this is if his heart's not in it, there's too much other stuff going on, too much noise. This is a good decision, because I think, as his manager Mark Cadell says later in the story, and as we always say, you don't play boxing. And if his mental state, because of everything else going on, is not in the right place, you can't put yourself in the ring because you could get seriously hurt. And while this story sort of talks about, he could have gone on to do all sorts of other bits and pieces, and, the best years could have been ahead of him, if his heart's not in it, I think this is really quite a courageous thing that Fa has done. That ultimately, despite, that Makhmudov fight, he was the away fighter travelling, he would have got paid a decent amount for that. Ultimately, he's decided, no, I can't justify doing what I'm doing just for another paycheck. And there's plenty of other boxers that don't make that decision, that they might hate the sport, that they've come to the end of their career, they're in journeyman mode, they're cashing in on their name value, and they will continue to do it, continue to take damage, and they don't want to do it, but they have to do it. I guess in Fa's case, more recently, he had that Parker fight a couple of years ago. That was a New Zealand, pay-per-view. He got $500,000 for that. And also he had a taste of the Saudi money with the fight with Frank Sanchez. And he got pretty hurt in that one, as well as the Lucas Brown one. So perhaps as well that the thing's not said in this story is that Fa also didn't want to be on the receiving end if his heart wasn't quite in it. So I think Junior Fa has made the right decision. All these things that are coalescing in his life, if he couldn't give it his all anymore, and actually when reading through the different story, there were parts where he just basically couldn't even put on his boxing gloves. He didn't want to be training. He had this upcoming fight. Basically, couldn't get into it. So it says he'd suffered that before, but also he knew from experience that one good sparring session would dissipate those nerves. And this time, Farr felt apprehensive every time he even contemplated training. So despite a looming, potentially lucrative fight, for a fortnight he did nothing. Running the Muay Thai half marathon had earned him some downtime, but by the end of the third week of inactivity, with his coaches and managers calling him, it was time to make a decision. I think ultimately he's made a good decision. And so this has been a decent story in New Zealand with good coverage on the front page of stuff.co.nz when it came out, and obviously in the printed version of their paper as well. So I think, Farr has to be commended for being honest with himself and being able to walk away. What he does now, that's a question. Previously, he had started up some sort of training and fitness-related stuff, so perhaps he will become some sort of trainer or coach in some capacity, whether it's fitness related to boxing. Who knows? But obviously with other things going on in his life where it talks about losing the church, losing his faith, all that sort of thing, obviously he's got broader things to think about than boxing. But I'm sure given some of the recent activity with the Frank Sanchez fight, the Parker fight a couple of years before, he's probably, doesn't have to immediately pick something up, and I don't think he'll be working at McDonald's next week, and I don't think he's desperate for a paycheck. Plenty of other boxers probably are not in the same position where they can just walk away. As I say, some guys go too long and take too much damage, and I guess this one as well, and I did mention in a comment on Patreon, there was with this fight with Makhmudov, slight cash out vibes, given what had happened in the past few fights with Brown, and then obviously with Frank Sanchez. He hadn't quite looked right, he got hurt, and he'd stayed hurt. Whenever he was taking a big shot, he hadn't looked good. So I think for his health as well, there's a benefit, because you can't take too many big shots. Makhmudov, if he had caught up with him, if they had a fought, that could have left some lasting damage. Some of these fights, some of these shots, which, really sort of discombobulate boxers in a big way, as we've seen against Brown and Sanchez, that can really leave a lasting impact, let alone take years off your career. And in this case, I think he's made a good decision. He is, a level-minded guy. I think Farr, in terms of New Zealand and his legacy, he's been a good servant to the sport, and I think he's made the right decision. In terms of Makhmudov, I'm not sure what he does next at a few weeks' notice. It's probably not going to be a great fight. I think many will remember Farr for his fight with Joseph Parker, because it was far more competitive than many expected it to be. So, that's probably one of the lasting memories a lot of international fans may have about Junior Farr, whereas maybe New Zealanders, obviously with his rise up, coming up the ranks, he was starting to make some noise. He was a good amateur, so good on Junior Farr for making, I think, what is a good call. I think the headline's a little bit misleading. The headline writers goes for, what's that got to do with the price of fish? Nothing. Junior Farr quits boxing, walks away while he's still got his faculties. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.